So, as I mentioned earlier, today I had originally scheduled myself to deliver a sermon called, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, How to Be a Good Person, which is a continuation of a sermon series where I'm going back and answering your questions from our January question box service. You had a lot of ethical questions. So this sermon, which I will give on July 21st, will discuss those ethical questions you raised. But like many of you, my heart has been very heavy by the images that we have seen coming from our southern border, by the descriptions of children separated from parents, families broken apart, of babies taking care of babies, of conditions in overcrowded camps. This humanitarian and ethical catastrophe is in part a result of our own policies. So this is a complex issue that I'm not trying to be overly simplistic about, but there are definitely policies and priorities at work here and why the situation looks like it does. So I've been struggling with what I'm seeing and hearing and what it means for these children and what it says about my country and about myself as a citizen. This has been weighing very heavily on me. This past Wednesday, I attended an event at UU-Indy that was called Rapid Responder Training, put on by Faith in Indiana. Faith in Indiana is a multi-faith coalition in Indiana that does justice work, which includes work for immigrant justice. And UU-Indy is a member of Faith in Indiana, which is why we were hosting the event here. And the reason they moved the event here at the last minute was because they had so many people who wanted to be a part of this that they outgrew their existing event. What Faith in Indiana has created is a rapid response network as a response to immigration detentions here in Indianapolis. So if you are detained by ICE, you can call a number and the operator will dispatch a volunteer to be with you so that you're not going through this experience alone, so that they can provide moral witness, so that they can make the community aware of it, so that they can accompany you through the court system and connect your family to aid and support. The reason that we were having this training at this time is because the president has threatened to ramp up detentions in major cities, which includes Indianapolis. And this ramping up means that people who are not normally considered priorities for detention because they are peaceful, productive, valued members of our community, these people would find themselves at great risk of a sudden arrest and deportation. And these sudden arrests, when they happen, break up families, they separate children from parents, they disrupt schooling, they delay health care, they place entire families under a cloud of paralyzing fear. We don't know if this ramp up in detentions will happen, but as a response to its possibility, Faith in Indiana put out a call for more of these rapid responders to be trained so that people would not go through this experience alone. And this past Wednesday, I can tell you, our social hall was absolutely packed. Absolutely packed. There were at least 60 people in here of all ages, mostly young adults, of all races, of all religions, all genders, all socioeconomic statuses, all here to respond with humanity to policies that are inhumane. All here to risk putting themselves physically at the scene of a detention for the sake of people they have never met, but who they have decided to treat with love. And that was something that I needed to see. That was a healing sight to my soul to be among all of those good-hearted people on Wednesday. And I think we could all use some of that same healing. These are times of remarkable tumult in our world and in our nation, with the news cycle dominated by natural disasters, by violence, by what seems like political insanity, by accelerating climate change and these heartbreaking images of children in detention centers at our border. And with all of this, it is easy to become numb, to become cynical, to feel helpless or hopeless. It is easy to forget that kindness and compassion still exist as real and active forces in the world. So instead of my planned sermon on ethical living, I decided today that I was going to redeliver a sermon from last summer that hopefully speaks to that same healing power of kindness and compassion. And I promise I will deliver our regularly scheduled sermon on July 21st. So during Joys and Sorrows today, I spoke of the Bodhisattva. And many religious traditions, most religious traditions, have in their mythology, in their symbolism, in their beliefs, some kind of entity that serves as a personification of kindness and compassion. And these entities often serve as helpers to humanity. These figures, sometimes supernatural figures, could be bodhisattvas in the Buddhist tradition, or angels in the Christian tradition, in the Abrahamic tradition. They could be ancestor spirits or nature spirits. We might feel or have felt a literal connection to such a spirit in our life. We might see in these figures a recognition that kindness and compassion are part and parcel of whatever it is that we call divine or sacred. We might just see in these figures our own human longing that kindness and compassion still be acting in the world. So, many of you know of Fred Rogers, more popularly known as Mr. Rogers. I like to think of Mr. Rogers as a modern-day bodhisattva because he made a career out of the simple idea that kindness was still the most important thing, and he radiated compassion. Fred Rogers famously recalled that when he was a boy, and that when he was overwhelmed or frightened by the news and the tumult in the world around him, his mother would say to him, "Look for the helpers." She said, whatever is going on, when bad things are happening, you will always also see people who are helping. Look to the helpers. So this world is big and confusing and scary for all of us right now. It's not just children who feel that way. I'm feeling it. Look for the helpers, Rogers said. So in that spirit, I wanted to share 3 stories of helpers with you. These are true stories of people helping one another, because I think we need these stories right now. And I'm going to start with a story which took place 2 summers ago at Panama City Beach, Florida. This story is from a Washington Post article by Katie Metler. On a Saturday afternoon in July, 2 boys, ages 8 and 11, were out in the water playing on boogie boards not too far from their parents, when they were both caught up in a rip current, a riptide. And a rip current is a narrow channel of water. I don't understand the physics of it, but it can form in the ocean, and it flows away from land, almost like a separate river inside the ocean going in the opposite direction. So the tide is coming in, but the rip current is pulling out. And anything that gets caught in a rip current gets pulled in that path out to sea. They can be hard to spot, and they are deadly even to experienced swimmers. So these 2 boys were caught in this current. They were being separated from their parents by the water and being carried further and further away from the shore. So a young couple nearby, 2 young women, realized that the situation that the boys were in, and they went to help rescue them, only to be trapped themselves. And from there, the situation quickly escalated. The boys' family, the mother, the father, the nephew, the grandma, they made their own rescue attempts. And in quick succession, they were also trapped in this current. Then 2 more strangers nearby. In all, 10 people were caught up in this deadly riptide. There was no lifeguard on the beach. There was no equipment available. By the time law enforcement was even made aware of this situation, the 10 people had been struggling for almost a half an hour. So a rescue boat was summoned, but in the meantime, they were drowning. By now, a crowd of onlookers had gathered on the beach, watching helplessly as these people in the far-off distance cried out for help that could not come soon enough. That was when a woman named Jessica Simmons called out to people on the beach to form a human chain. She said, "These people are not drowning today. We're going to get them out." So one by one, the people on the beach, who were total strangers, some of whom could not even swim, joined hands. They linked arms and they began to form a human lifeline in the water, reaching out to the riptide. More than 80 people joined in, extending further and further out until they were near enough to the trapped people that Jessica and her husband, who were experienced swimmers, could use a boogie board to bridge the gap. It was a very dangerous thing to do, to willingly enter a riptide, but with help from others, they ferried the exhausted, barely conscious people over to the human chain, who then passed them person to person down the length of the chain back to the safety of the beach. All 10 people trapped in that deadly current survived, July 8th, 2017, thanks to 80 strangers who determined that they would live, who linked arms and who made a difference. Look to the helpers. Our next story of helping is one that I first heard from a UU minister, the Reverend Robin Bartlett. It is a true story that took place on September 11th, 2001, that most awful of awful days. And on that day, 38 international flights carrying 7,000 passengers from 100 different countries were all diverted to the tiny town of Gander, Newfoundland. So you can imagine this, you have all these airplanes up in the air, the word comes out of what has happened in New York. All of these planes are diverted to the same place to get them to ground, and they're all diverted to Gander, Newfoundland. So I'm pulling details now from a 2016 Washington Post article by Petula Dvorak, and also 2017 New Yorker article by Michael Schumann. Gander, Newfoundland is a town of 10,000 people with 3 stoplights. When the 38 planes were diverted there on 9/11, the size of the town nearly doubled overnight. The need was daunting. 7,000 frightened, confused, stranded people representing many different languages, cultures, religions. And the townspeople opened their hearts and homes and businesses to all of them. There were naturally not enough restaurants and not enough hotels to even begin to accommodate these extra 7,000 people. So the people of Gander began filling up their schools, their churches, their community centers, their bedrooms, their living rooms with these trapped strangers. Bus drivers who had been on strike walked off their picket lines and went back to work so they could transport the passengers. Bakeries worked around the clock so they could feed the passengers. The town shipped in clean underwear from 200 miles away. They arranged for kosher meals. They created spaces for the Muslim passengers to pray. The townspeople also cared for the 17 dogs and cats that were being carried in the cargo hold of the plane, and a pair of what are variously described as great apes, chimps, or bonobos. Whatever kind of primate it was, one of them was pregnant. And now there is a little chimp or ape or bonobo in the world named Gander after the town in which they were born. The passengers were stranded in Gander for 5 days. Schulman relates how on day 2, the mayor was at the Royal Canadian Legion Hall initiating marooned passengers as honorary Newfoundlanders, very hard to say, in a ritual that is called screeching in. Visitors wear yellow southwesters, they eat hard bread and pickled bologna, they kiss a cod on the lips, then they drink the local rum called screech, while onlookers bang an ugly stick covered in beer bottle caps. This is the initiation ceremony they all went through. The mayor said we started off with 7,000 strangers, but we finished with 7,000 family members. The story of Gander is now being retold as a Broadway musical called Come From Away. There's one more twist to this story. The people of Gander refused to take any money from the passengers for their assistance. So one of the passengers, a woman named Shirley Brooks Jones, who was 80 years old, got the idea to pass the hat on the plane, and they raised $15,000 on the spot for a scholarship fund for the children of Gander. But Brooke Jones, it turns out, was also a professional fundraiser. So she kept at it once she got home. And today, the Lewisport area Flight 15 scholarship has grown to almost $2 million. And some 250 Gander high school students have received scholarships. So kindness begets kindness, and help begets help down into the next generation. Look for the helpers. And I want to share one more story of people making a difference. And I share it in particular because I know so many people here in this congregation are teachers or tutors or big brothers or big sisters or CASA advocates, or you run Boy Scout or Girl Scout troops, you teach, you mentor, you coach youth sports, or you work with kids in the arts, right? Just generally, so many of you have dedicated your time and energy and your hearts to making a difference in a child's life. And that is one of the best kind of helpers you can possibly be. So I thought of all of you when I heard this story. This is a story from the NPR StoryCorps program, August 25th, 2017, by Tanya Ballard Brown. The story of William Weaver, who in 1964 was 14 years old, sophomore in high school, and one of 14 black students who was chosen to integrate a formerly all-white high school in Knoxville, Tennessee. William Weaver was not received kindly by that high school or its staff. He was not received kindly into the program. William recounts how on the very first day the principal read the roll call, Bill Weaver. William replied, "My name is William, sir." For this he was suspended 30 minutes into his first day. From there it went downhill. Every day William was told in a different way that he did not belong. On testing day, teachers would literally stand over his desk and snatch the papers away the second the time expired. William went from being a star student at his primary school to failing every class in his new school, including gym. And he began to wonder if maybe he really didn't belong, and more poisonously, he began to wonder if maybe he really wasn't that smart. One evening, William recalled, Mr. Hill, his 7th grade science teacher from his former school, the African American school, Mr. Hill came to his home. He said, "I hear you've been having some trouble." So Mr. Hill told William to meet him after school every day at the old junior high and also on Saturdays. And every day Mr. Hill would be waiting for William along with other teachers. And they tutored William in all of the subjects every day. And his grades came up and he stopped doubting himself. And then he began to excel academically. It became a point of pride for himself in this new school to be the best student. But he remembers his achievements were never recognized at his new school. No one ever talked to him about his academic potential. No one ever talked to him about college. Then, much to his surprise, William got a letter as a senior saying he had been accepted at Howard University with a scholarship. He went. And today he is Dr. William Weaver, Chief of Surgery at the Fayetteville, Virginia Medical Center in North Carolina. Fayetteville VA Medical Center in North Carolina. Dr. Weaver told how 37 years after getting that letter, he ran into Mr. Hill at a funeral. He said, "You know, Mr. Hill, if I had not gotten that scholarship, I don't know what would have happened. And I don't know how I got it, because I never even applied for it." Mr. Hill replied, "I know, because I filled in that application and I sent it off for you." So Mr. Hill stepped in, Dr. Weaver concluded, and I believe he saved my life. People ask, how did I get here? How did I make it? People have helped you, whether you knew it or not. So who are the helpers in our own life? Who have been the helpers in your life? This is a question that Mr. Rogers, our modern-day bodhisattva, liked to ask people all the time. At a commencement address at Middlebury College in 2001, he said, "From the time you were very little, you've had people who have smiled you into smiling, people who have talked you into talking, sung you into singing, loved you into loving." So he said to those graduates, let's take some time to think of those extra special people. Some of them may be right here, some may be far away, some may even be in heaven. Mr. Rogers said, no matter where they are deep down, you know they've always wanted what is best for you. They've always cared about you beyond measure and have encouraged you to be true to the best within you. So let's just take a minute of silence, Mr. Rogers said, to think about those people now. So let us also do that here now. Let's take a moment of silence, and I invite you to think about someone who has helped you. Someone who has cared for you, someone who has loved you into loving, or opened your world to previously unseen possibilities. And I will chime us out of the silence with a note from the singing bowl after about a minute. Now here comes the participation part of our morning. If you're comfortable, let's take just a few more minutes, and I invite you to find someone near you, preferably not your spouse or partner, because odds are you might talk to them later today anyway. But if you're comfortable, find someone and share with them briefly who that person was that you thought of and why, and let them share back, and anything else you want to share about. We'll take about 2 minutes, and then I will chime us out again. So find someone and share who that person was who loved you into loving you. Take about 15 seconds and finish up. You all are so good at that. I want to say just one last word about helpers. Today was a multi-generational service where the children stay in longer than the service. We do that periodically for a number of reasons, but one of them is it's an important way for the children to learn more about what it's like to be in church and what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. So one of the great privileges I have is to see the kids come up and kind of the magic in their eyes as they light the candle of joy and sorrow, experience putting money in the offertory basket. You know, one of my favorite sounds in church is the sound of children because it's the sound of a church with a future. But it takes helpers to make that happen. So I want to give special appreciation to the parents who have helped their children be through church today, the big people around them who have been generous and kind and patient, and the people out in the social hall who are tending to them now. So thank you for the warmth and caring that you show to the children in our congregation. Now let us be grateful for the people who have helped us in our life, both for the good they have done and for the example they have shown. May we look for our own opportunities to be helpers to other people, to model kindness, compassion, and service for a world that needs a reminder that another way is still possible, that compassion and kindness is still possible. May we be that way. Blessed be, and amen.